Last week, I began the message by telling you that my go-to emotion when it comes to my faith is turbulence. That describes how my faith is with God. It's very, very turbulent. And it won't surprise you that after the service and subsequently in the days that followed, I had a lot of feedback from a number of people who were expressing resonance with what I was talking about. I talked to people who had lost loved ones, tragically. I talked to people who faced huge life obstacles. People were telling me that they related to the writer of Psalm 73, which we looked at last week, that they had almost lost their faith. Other people were relating that they loved the Harriet Beecher Stowe quote when she said this: "When the heartstrings are suddenly cut, it's a physical impossibility to feel faith. Though we submit to God, it's by constant painful effort than sweet attraction." So anyway, I got done with the message last week, and honestly, it's exhausting. It's exhausting to process with so many people the brokenness of their lives and their own turbulence. And then there's this thing, a little insider information here. When you're writing a message, if you have any, or a sermon, you have any integrity at all, you got to take it personally. You got to ask yourself, how does this relate to me? And I'm going to tell you, after last week, when I got done preaching last week, I was ready for an emotional break. I was ready to just, can I settle down? Well, that's what my wish was, but I gave it in about 2 hours. It was over. Within hours of that sermon, I was hit with a series of emotional waves that crashed into me and left me reeling for the early part of this past week. Some of the waves were personal, some of them were relational, and some of them were related to Grace Church. So once again, I knew I needed to go to my sanctuary, my time with God, and like Asaph said, I went into your sanctuary and then I finally understood, right? So I went there and I started to pay attention again to the voice of God. It was there I had an epiphany early this week. I had a realization. I'm going to use a sports analogy. I feel like when I go into my sanctuary, like I did again this past week, and I do on a regular basis, I feel like I'm playing defense in sports. It's good. I mean, it's almost like getting in the sanctuary with God and listening and paying attention to his voice is like me stopping the madness for a period of time and ending the turbulence and the frustration. And that's a good thing. But I realized earlier this week, that's great, but I want to go on the offense. I feel like I need to reclaim I want to get some ground back. I want to make some positive steps to move with energy. I needed a game plan to build my strength back up and recover my heart. I don't mind having a turbulent faith. I don't mind that at all. It's just the way I'm going to be. But I don't want to live with that every day, every week, all the time. I want to have some strength, right? You want to build up some strength. So here's the beautiful thing. God was so gracious to me to give me another psalm to preach on this week. He gave me a strength-building psalm. He gave me Psalm 18. So we're going to look at that together today. Grab a Bible and turn to Psalm 18, page 458 is the page number for our house Bibles. Welcome to those of you watching online. Join us. Get a Bible of your own, or you can look on our app and follow along. So like Amy said, all summer long, we're looking at our emotions vis-a-vis God. What are our emotions as we relate to God? The Psalms are perfect because they teach us how to bring our true emotions to God in prayer, because they cover such a vast range of emotional landscapes. The Psalms help us to awaken our faith and deepen our pursuit of God. So the one we're going to look at this morning here, Psalm 18, is going to show us how to rebuild our faith, re-energize our faith, strengthen our faith. I'm thinking some of you could use a little bit of this morning, okay? This one will move you from defense to offense. All right? All right, let me give you some background. Keep the Bibles open on your laps. Here we go. This is one of David's Psalms. He's written, about half the Psalms? And this one happens to be the fourth longest psalm in the whole collection. Interestingly enough, it is found not just in Psalms 18, it is found in a second place in the scriptures. It's found in the book of 2 Samuel 22. So we have the same song with some minor variations in two places, which tells me it's a big deal if it shows up twice. Now, why was it written? Look down at right above verse 1, there's a superscription that tells us why it was written. It says, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul." Now, it might be that when David wrote this song, he was thinking specifically about a specific situation with Saul, or it might be that Saul and his enemies was sort of a statement to cover the whole of his life every time he had to deal with an enemy. This must have been such a big deal to him to include in Psalms at the end of, for the writer of Samuel to include, because the very next words are David's last words. So we have David's last words in 2 Samuel 22, preceded by David's last song. This is such a huge song to the people of God. It's been it's a song that we sing or a poem that we read for the last 3,000 years. And I think it's a roadmap to rebuilding our strength when we're under fire and frustrated. So here's my big idea. I'm just going to lay it out right at the beginning. Here's what I think this song tells us. The strength you desperately need will come from three things: tenacious love for God, a robust theology, and unwavering gratitude. All right? That's where we're going. That's the big idea. So let's reclaim our faith today. Let's get some strength. And I'm just going to start right off with the first four words of the psalm. What are they? I love you, Lord. Now, which seems innocuous enough, seems simple enough, but I want to point out two unusual characteristics of these four words. The first is the word love. I have wrestled with trying to describe this word, this Hebrew word love. It's very unusual. It only appears one time in all of the Old Testament, and it's right here. And it's not a simple word. It's a passionate word. It's an intense word. It's almost like it's like a knee-jerk reaction. I love you, Lord. And I got something in my eye, so if I keep touching my eye, 1 second here. Anybody wear contact lenses? And you know what this is like? Try doing it when you're preaching. That's not so good. Okay, there we go. Thank you, Jesus. That was good. All right. I love you. All right. So I was trying to figure out a way to describe this word, to use English words to explain it, and I really can't because it's such an unusual Hebrew word. So here's what I came up with. Instead of me trying to tell you what the word means, let me tell you what it might feel like. Imagine the most powerful, let's use a man. Let's choose your father or your grandfather. Somebody in your life that represents, it's Father's Day, so we could use our imaginations, and you have your father looking at you, you know, in all his masculinity, and he looks at you and he says, I love you. Now, you love it when your mom says, I love you. But when your dad looks at you and says, I love you, whoo, that's different. That's what get the feeling of this word love, that's what it means. Now, the second unusual characteristic of I love you, Lord, is not just the power of the word love here, this unusual word. It's the tense. He literally doesn't say, I love you, Lord. Watch this. It says, I will love you, Lord. It's actually almost like a defiant statement that despite what I'm going through, I will love you. It's an aggressive commitment. It's a tenacious kind of love. Despite the pain in my life, I will love you. Despite the frustration that I feel right now, I will love you. And despite all evidence to the contrary that would tell me I shouldn't, I will love you. This is a gritty love. This is a courageous love. This is a tenacious love. And this is David looking at God saying, I will love you. This is love with resolve. This is David's love was a stubborn refusal to quit God. He might have reason to say, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore, but he chooses otherwise. I will love you. And it reminds me, Job, we talked about Job last week, the great sufferer of all time. After he's struggling with his health and he's lost everything, he says this to God, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And that's what David is saying here. I don't care. I don't care what happens in my life, what happens around me. I will love. Look, this is no naive faith. David was no simpleton when it came to his belief. He faced more than you and I likely will ever face in our lifetime, and yet this is how he went to his grave: "I will love you, Lord." But what did he base it on? Where did his stubborn refusal to reject God come from? Well, that's the rest of this song. It's going to give us a clue as to why he could say with such resolve, "I will love you." And I'm going to begin with verses 1 and 2 here. And I think what tells me is this man had a robust theology. He had a robust theology. And by the way, do you know that you have a theology? Theology is not just what preacher people do. Theology is not just for seminarians. Theology is just not for theologians. Everybody's got a theology. You know what theology is? It's simply what you believe about God. You and I could sit down and have a cup of coffee and I'd say, "Tell me your theology." Well, this is what I believe about God. This is what I believe about God. That's your theology. David had a theology, and I want you to see how robust it was. Verses 1 and 2. He says, "God, you are my strength." Follow along as I read. "Lord is my rock. You're my fortress. You're my Savior." Again, he uses rock. It's a different Hebrew word for strength. "In whom I find protection. He is my shield. He is the power that saves me, and he is my place of safety." Now, let me tell you, the tendency would be to try to say, well, let's talk about what this word means, and this word means, and this one, this man. This is poetry, everybody. You don't take apart a verse and tear it down when it's poetry. You get the overall feeling of it. You get the overall general perspective is, why is he choosing all these words? He's not giving us a dictionary of doctrine. He's painting a landscape of the character of God. And it's important for us not to look at each word, but what do these words tell us about his perception of God? And I see three things that emerge out of here. Tell me how David felt about God just by choosing these words. Number one, I think that David believed in his mind and heart that God knows. God knows. God knew him, knew what was going in his life, was paying attention to what was going on in his life. You know, like God said to Jeremiah, "I knew you before I formed you in my mother's womb." God knows. Can I ask you if you believe whether God knows you? Do you believe that God knows your every step? Do you believe that God knows what's going on in your heart right now, and that he knows what's in your mind? Right now at this moment, God knows. David did. That was a part of his robust theology, but that wasn't all. He didn't just believe that God knows. He believed that God cares. He didn't just know. He wasn't just a robot God who just knows everything, not just omniscient. God cares. Like David said in Psalm 56, "You keep track of all my sorrows. You've collected all my tears in your bottle." That verse has always intrigued me. Have you cried a lot of tears? Look, the fact is, if you're one of those dudes who say, "No, I don't cry very much," well, you should. You should express what's going on in your heart. It's okay. It's not only okay, it's healthy. And then what God does, because he cares so much for you, but do you know how much he cares for you? He's counting the tears. In other words, he knows every hurt. He knows why you hurt. He knows the depth of your hurt. He knows it all, and he cares deeply. He cares deeply. But that's not all that comprised David's theology. He believed that God knows. He believed that God cares. Now watch this. He also believed that God was engaged in his life. Constantly engaged, tinkering with his life, sustaining him. That's what all those words tell me. His God, you're my fortress, my shield, my power. You are defending me. You are rescuing. Look, there is a common theology today that's one of the more popular theological movements. It's called deism. Deism is the thought that God created the world and spun it and stepped back and folded his arms and said, I wonder how that's going to turn out. That's deism. David was no deist. He believed that God was tinkering with his life, that God's hands were in his life, and he was engaged. God knows, God cares, God is engaged. That's robust theology. And that's what allowed David to say, I will love you. All right, let's get personal. What's your theology? What do you believe about God? Do you know that what you believe about God is the most important thing about you? The A.W. Tozer says, what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about us. Now, if that's true, I'm going to ask you some questions. I want you to ponder these questions. Are you going to continue to allow your pain to define your God? Is that where your theology comes from? Is you're using your pain to define him? Second question I have for you is this. Are you going to continue to allow someone else to tell you what you believe about God? In other words, how long are you going to persist in living off your parents' faith? Well, I grew up in the church, and look, you're a grown-up boy. You're a man. You're a woman. How about using your own head and your own heart and figuring out what you believe about God? It's okay. You're grown up now. You can do that. What are you going to do? What's it going to take for you to get... Look, I know some of you are like, I struggle with God. I've had many conversations. I've struggled with God. We struggle with God. And I just don't know what to... Why is there so much pain in the world? And why does he allow this to happen? And so you continue to fuss with these questions, which I get. They're good questions. But here's what I want to ask you. How long are you going to fuss with those questions without sitting down and trying to figure out whether you're going to get answers? Yeah. You can keep fussing with these questions. Good on you. Good thing. We got a whole bunch of people around here at this church who would be happy to sit down with you and have a conversation about it. When are you going to do that? Well, I don't know. I'm going to continue to struggle. Dude, let's talk. Better deal with this. How long are you going to persist in having a really lame theology? Life is too hard to shuffle along with some lame faith. So stop being naive about God. Stop with your lazy theology. And stop procrastinating this. Stop putting it off. What comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. Okay, let's review. David has a song for us here, Psalm 18. He's crafted a poem that demonstrates just how his strength was rebuilt in the middle of his turbulent life. Man had a turbulent life. He determined to love God. I will love you, God. His love was gritty and tenacious. 2, he also squared away in his brain what he believed about God. But there's one more practice that David engaged that helped create what I think is the scaffolding, and I use that word a lot, the scaffolding that held him up in his turbulent life. Look, sometimes when life is falling apart and it's crumbling and you're frustrated, what you need is something on the outside around you to hold you up while the insides are crumbling. We need something, some kind of a scaffolding system around us that holds us up in the meantime till my faith can catch up. And that's why I'm suggesting that the thing that David gave himself to in addition to theology was gratitude. Gratitude, unending gratitude that created the scaffolding in his life. The strength you desperately need will come from tenacious love, robust theology, and unwavering gratitude. He practiced relentlessly. This is really important to me. Here's why this last part is so important to me. My personality is I really don't care much about yesterday. Like, I only care about tomorrow. Now, that's not a good thing, okay? If you need a leader, I'll get you to tomorrow. But in the same time, I'm forgetting everything that happened in the past, which means I'm terrible at gratitude. Because to be strong at gratitude, you got to be able to look at the past and look at what has happened and say thank you for what you've done in the past. David was an expert in gratitude. He learned how to tell his story to himself, and that ended up being the scaffolding. He would be able to look at his life and say, well, God, you met me here. You were my shield and you're my strength, so you're going to be my strength again in the future. I need this as much as anything else I'm saying to myself today. I've got to figure out how to practice gratitude. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just read you his story, and this is long. I'm not going to lie. This is long, so just settle in. I'm not going to read the whole psalm, because I know you're worried, because Dave, you got like 5 minutes, and you covered like 2 verses out of 100 here. So I don't know how you're going to finish this thing, right? So watch this. Watch how I fly now at this point. I'm just going to read a portion of this to you. This is all about gratitude, because you got to learn how to say thanks if you're going to build up the strength in your life, right? I need that. I'm assuming maybe 2 or 3 of you need this as well. Here we go. Follow along. As I start reading verse 3, I'll read to verse 31, or you can just close your eyes and listen. David's telling his story and what he's grateful for. Here we go. I called on the Lord who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. The ropes of death entangled me. The floods of destruction swept over me. The grave wrapped its ropes around me. Death laid a trap in my path. But look at this. In my distress, I cried out to the Lord. Yeah, I prayed to my God for help, and he heard me from his sanctuary, and my cry to him reached his ears. Then the earth quaked and trembled. The foundations of the mountains shook. They quaked because of his anger. Smoke poured from his nostrils. Fierce flames leapt from his mouth. Glowing coals blazed forth from him. He opened the heavens and he came down. God came down. Dark storm clouds were beneath his feet. He was mounted on a mighty angelic being, and God flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. She shrouded himself in darkness, veiled his approach with dark rain clouds, and thick clouds shielded the brightness around him and rained down hail and burning coals. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded among the hail and the burning coals. And he shot his arrows, and he scattered his enemies. And great bolts of lightning flashed, and they were confused. Then at your command, O Lord, at the blast of your breath, the bottom of the sea could be seen, and the foundations of the earth were laid bare. God reached down from heaven and he rescued me. He drew me out of the deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemies, from those who hated me and were too strong for me. They attacked me in a moment when I was in distress, but the Lord supported me. He led me to a place of safety. He rescued me because he delights in me. The Lord rewarded me for doing right. He restored me because of my innocence, for I've kept the ways of the Lord. I've not turned from my God to follow evil. I followed all his regulations. I've never abandoned his decrees. I'm blameless before God. I've kept myself from sin, and the Lord rewarded me for doing right because he's seen my innocence. So to the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. You rescue the humble, but you humiliate the proud. You light a lamp for me. The Lord my God lights up my darkness. And in your strength, I can crush an army. With my God, I can scale any wall. God's way is perfect. All the Lord's promises prove true. He's a shield for all who look to him for protection. For who is God except the Lord? Who but our God is a solid rock? Wow. What incredible poetic imagery. We got earthquakes and massive storms, and we got the whole bottom of the sea being all the water pushed out of the way. We got God riding on an angelic creature, shooting arrows, smoke coming out of his nose, and flames coming out of God's mouth. What was David remembering here? What situations was he recalling that generated such gratitude? I don't know. He faced a lot of different enemies in his lifetime, had a lot of different situations, but clearly God helped him respond. My question to you is, who are your enemies? Is it a person? A real human being? An employer? A family member? A neighbor? They your enemy? An illness? Are you dealing with cancer or depression or anxiety? A system of oppression maybe? You're facing poverty or hatred or racism, injustice, isolation. Maybe it's Satan himself, the evil one, dark forces in this world. Or maybe you got your own personal demons that are your enemies, your habits and your addictions. It is crucial when we face opposition that we look at yesterday and last week and last month and last year for the deliverance that God has given us. Because if we can't figure out what God did last week, we're not going to be ready for what's coming next week. We got to practice some gratitude for last year, because I don't know what's coming around the corner. Do you? A woman stopped me in the lobby. She said, I know what you're talking about. On Memorial Day, a tornado completely obliterated my house. Talk about not knowing what's coming next. I believe it's true, whoever said this, that gratitude turns what we have into enough. Gratitude turns what we have into enough. Remember it, celebrate it, sing it, because it will give us strength. So the strength you desperately need will come from tenacious love, robust theology, and unwavering gratitude. Now I'm going to wrap this up by reading just a few more verses, and then we'll close our service. Because I want to show you that after all of what David went through to build up the strength, it happened. I'm going to show you the strength he did. Look at verse 32. God arms me with strength. He makes my way perfect. I'm as sure-footed as a deer. I'm able to stand on mountain heights. God has trained my hands for battle. He has strengthened my arm to draw a bronze bow. You have given me your shield of victory. Your right hand supports me. Your help has made me great. Down to 46, verse 46. So I say, the Lord lives. Praise to my rock. May the God of my salvation be exalted. He is the God who pays back those who harm me. He subdues the nations under me. He rescues me from my enemies. God, you hold me safe beyond the reach of my enemies. You save me from violent opponents. And for this, Lord, I'll praise you among the nations. I will sing praises to your name, because you give great victories to your king. You show unfailing love to your anointed, to David and all his descendants forever. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Neither do you. I don't know what's going to happen to me this afternoon. But I want to tell my church this. From the bottom of my heart, I want you to hear this. Regardless of what today brings or tomorrow brings, I will love God. Yes. I will love God. Because I know He knows. I know He cares. And I know He's engaged in my life. I know those things. That's my theology. And I promise you, I'm going to do better at looking at yesterday and thanking God for what He's done in my life. Let's do that together. I will love God.